It was the dead of winter in Lakefield, Oregon. A small, sleepy town nestled in pine-covered hills, where the mornings start slow and the wind always seems to carry whispers of forgotten things. It was here, on a cold January morning in 2011, that something long buried began to stir, not by accident, not by design, but because sometimes the dead can no longer stay silent. Frank and Linda Howard had lived in their modest craftsman home for nearly 6 years. Nothing remarkable ever happened on Blue Jay Lane. The neighbors were quiet, the winters mild, and the most excitement they ever got was the occasional lost dog or overgrown maple tree brushing the power lines. But that morning, they woke up to something unusual. The heating wasn't working. At first, Frank thought it was the thermostat. Then maybe the circuit breaker. But the blinking red light on the wall-mounted unit confirmed it. Something was wrong with the system itself. The heating unit was installed in the crawl space beneath their kitchen floor, a low, dusty hollow that ran beneath half the house, designed to keep moisture out and give access to plumbing and wiring in old wooden homes like theirs. It wasn't the kind of place you wanted to be in January. But Frank was the kind of man who'd rather get his hands dirty than call a contractor. So he grabbed his flashlight, pulled on an old hoodie and gloves, and opened the hatch. The air underneath was colder than he expected. The ground was damp with winter condensation, and every sound, the scrape of his boots, the creak of wooden joists above, seemed louder in the confined darkness. He crouched low and moved in, knees brushing the earth. Cobwebs, wires, rusted nails. The smell of dirt and mildew. And then, something else. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't a smell. It was a feeling. A kind of stillness that didn't feel natural. A weight in the air that settled on his shoulders. Frank shined his flashlight forward and saw nothing but pipes and insulation. But as he turned to his right, the beam landed on something that didn't belong. Just the tips. The kind teenagers wear, faded white and blue, partially buried in soil. At first, he thought maybe some old junk left behind by a previous owner. But as he inched closer, something about the angle, the position, it looked too deliberate. He stopped. The shoes weren't just lying there. They were upright, attached to something. He didn't scream. He didn't touch anything. He just backed out, hand trembling as he crawled backward into the daylight. Linda was in the kitchen, still in her robe, stirring a pot of coffee. When Frank came up and told her what he'd seen, just the words "shoes under the house," Linda dropped the spoon. She stood still for a long moment, as if replaying something in her mind. And then she said quietly, "Do you remember what the McMullins told us? When we moved in?" Frank didn't. But Linda did. 14 years ago, the house they now lived in had been the center of a local tragedy. A teenage boy, just 17, vanished without a trace. His name was Evan Spencer. No note. No signs of forced entry. One minute he was home. The next, gone. Linda never thought much of it. Rumors, small-town gossip, a boy who probably ran off and never looked back. But now, she wasn't so sure. That afternoon, Linda took the flashlight and climbed into the crawl space herself. She wasn't the kind of woman who waited around for answers. She wanted to see it with her own eyes. And there they were. The sneakers. Same as Frank described, white and blue, dirt-caked, barely visible. She reached out, half expecting them to come free with a gentle tug. But they didn't move. It was as if something, or someone, was holding them down. She dug around them with her gloved hands, scraping at the earth, and then, something solid. Not plastic. Not metal. Something that felt human. Linda scrambled out so fast she scraped her elbow on the floorboards. She looked at Frank and said the only words that made sense. "Call the police." And just like that, their quiet home on Blue Jay Lane became a crime scene. By nightfall, detectives had cordoned off the yard, forensic vans lined the curb, and neighbors huddled on porches in stunned silence. A full skeletal body was recovered just beneath the kitchen floor, buried in shallow soil, face down, fully clothed, still wearing the same sneakers that had caught Frank's flashlight. The medical examiner would later estimate the body had been there for over a decade. No ID, but the height, age, and dental features matched the missing boy, Evan Spencer. And as the pieces started to fall into place, so did the questions. Why had no one found him sooner? Who buried him there? And most chilling of all, if Evan had been killed inside the house, who had been living above his grave all these years? Frank and Linda were cleared almost immediately. They'd bought the home years after Evan's disappearance. But what no one realized then was that this case, the hidden body, the teenager, the crawl space, was just the beginning. Across the country, another house, another man, another body waiting to be found. And one day soon, the earth would whisper again. The discovery under the Howard kitchen floor sent shockwaves through the Lakefield Police Department. No one expected a missing person case from the 90s to resurface like this, literally from the ground. But there was a body, still clothed, still buried where someone had put it more than a decade earlier. And now, the focus shifted from discovery to identification. The forensic team worked through the night. What they found added weight to Linda's hunch. The skeleton belonged to a male teenager, estimated between 16 and 18 years old, Caucasian, standing approximately 5'10". The victim was found wearing a weathered high school varsity football hoodie, white cotton boxers, and a pair of blue Nike sneakers, models that hadn't been sold in over a decade. But it wasn't just the clothing that helped. There was a fixed retainer still attached to the lower canine teeth. It was a detail only someone close to the victim might remember. The detectives called up the county's missing persons archive. Files that hadn't been opened in years were dusted off, scanned, and laid out across desks. And soon, one name kept reappearing. Evan Spencer. Reported missing on October 18, 1997. He was 17. A junior at Northwood High School. Played wide receiver on the football team. Good student. No criminal record. No known enemies. No known struggles with drugs, depression, or mental illness. Just a teenage boy who'd lived with his mother and stepfather, and vanished. Back then, Evan's disappearance hadn't been considered suspicious. It was the late 90s. When teenagers ran away, people assumed they'd turn up somewhere. Some did. Evan didn't. The case remained open for years, but no leads ever led anywhere. No credit card activity. No phone calls. No social security trace. Eventually, time wore it down into a cold file. Until now. Dental records were requested from Evan's former orthodontist. 2 days later, the comparison confirmed it. The boy under the Howard kitchen floor was Evan Michael Spencer. And just like that, the cold case turned hot. News traveled fast in Lakefield. The town wasn't big enough to contain something like this. People who had once gone to school with Evan called in with old memories. Some remembered him as quiet, polite, athletic. Others said he'd been distant in his final months, arguing more with teachers, skipping practice, getting into trouble. Rumors began circulating again, as they had 14 years earlier. But this time, the police weren't chasing shadows. They had a body. They had a location. And most importantly, they had a timeline. The last time Evan Spencer was seen alive was inside that house. The house where he lived with his mother, Teresa Spencer, and her husband, Victor Latham. Detectives paid Teresa a visit the following day. She had since remarried and moved to another part of the state. She was older now, quieter, wearier, but when they mentioned her son's name, something in her face broke. She asked just one question. Where did you find him? When they told her, beneath the floor of the home she once shared with Victor, Teresa didn't speak. She just sat, hands clasped, eyes unfocused. For years she had feared the worst. But nothing, not even her darkest fears, included the possibility that Evan had never left the house. That he had been murdered right under her feet while she searched the country. I thought he ran away, she whispered. But deep down I never believed it. She recalled the day he vanished. She had been away on a work trip. She called Victor multiple times that day to check in. He told her Evan had gone out to meet a friend. That he'd probably be home later. He never was. Teresa remembered receiving a typed note in the mail 2 days later. It claimed to be from Evan. It said he was heading to California to chase his football dream. That Victor had been right all along. That he was sorry for being difficult. At the time, the note didn't sit right with her. It sounded rehearsed. Too formal. Evan had never called Victor right before. He'd barely tolerated the man. Their relationship had always been tense, more like distant roommates than family. Still, police at the time saw no sign of foul play. There was no blood, no forced entry, no struggle. And the note? It gave just enough hope. A kid chasing dreams. Not a victim of murder. Now, with Evan's body found beneath the kitchen floor, the entire narrative shifted. Investigators obtained a warrant and began reviewing old files, phone records, property documents, appliance purchases, anything that might offer a clue. Victor Latham had lived in the house for 19 years. He'd never moved. He still owned it. But what shocked investigators most was what they found when they entered his new residence. Victor had become a hoarder. Stacks of boxes reached the ceiling. Old bills, receipts, phones. Even outdated electronics from the early 2000s still sat in drawers. Among the clutter, they found a typewriter ribbon from 1997. Embedded in the inked ribbon was the exact letter Teresa had received all those years ago, proving it had been typed in Victor's home. The same letter he'd claimed came from Evan. The same one that had stopped Teresa from pushing harder. But the most damning find wasn't paper. It was a handgun. A .38 caliber revolver with corrosion along the barrel. And when the bullets were examined, the rifling marks, the spiral grooves that make each bullet's signature, matched those found in Evan's body. The murder weapon had never left the house. Just like Evan. The story was no longer a mystery. It was a puzzle, and piece by piece, it was beginning to form a picture. A boy who never left. A man who never moved. A lie buried under a kitchen floor. And a mother who never stopped wondering, why? The case was building. The town was watching. And for the first time in 14 years, Evan Spencer had a voice again. In every house, there's a version of peace. For the Spencers, that peace was always conditional. From the outside, their home on Blue Jay Lane had once looked like any other family dwelling, neatly trimmed hedges, a small garden out front, and the glow of warm lights in the windows. But inside, behind closed doors, tension simmered quietly for years. It started long before Evan disappeared. Before Victor Latham became Teresa Spencer's husband, he had been her co-worker. Reserved, methodical, dependable. He wasn't the kind of man who swept anyone off their feet, but after her divorce from Evan's biological father, stability felt like a gift. Victor offered that. Or so it seemed. At first, Evan tolerated Victor. They didn't talk much, but they coexisted. Evan was 13 then, old enough to form opinions, young enough to want guidance. But Victor never tried to connect. He treated Evan like a tenant, not a stepson. Over time, things grew cold. Victor had rules. Very specific, very rigid rules. There were labels on the food in the refrigerator, "Do not touch," written in black marker across Gatorade bottles and boxes of snacks. He locked up the pantry cabinet and rationed snacks, claiming it was for budgeting. He timed the shower usage, limited television access, and inspected Evan's backpack every Friday like it was a customs checkpoint. Discipline, he called it. Control, Evan called it. Teresa was stuck in the middle. She tried to smooth things over. "He's just trying to help you grow up," she'd say. He didn't have it easy either. But Evan wasn't buying it. He was growing fast, taller, louder, more opinionated. He pushed back when Victor criticized him. He didn't hide his resentment anymore. By the time Evan was 16, he and Victor were on opposite sides of every room. They fought often. Small arguments about chores turned into shouting matches about respect. Victor kept his tone low, measured, and threatening. Evan would slam his bedroom door or walk out of the house and not return for hours. Teresa began to feel like she lived in two different homes, one where she played wife and one where she played referee. She was exhausted, torn between the man she had promised to build a life with and the son she had raised from birth. She'd even considered moving out with Evan, starting fresh. But money was tight. Her job in insurance barely covered their bills, and Victor held most of the financial control. He reminded her of that constantly. The summer before Evan vanished, the house was a war zone. Victor began keeping a notebook, logging Evan's infractions. Leaving dishes in the sink. Coming home late. Leaving lights on. Teresa found it one morning tucked in the kitchen drawer, beside the coupons and warranty receipts. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Evan had started sleeping at friends' houses more often. Sometimes, he'd come home after dark and head straight to his room without a word. Other times, he'd sit on the porch alone, hoodie pulled over his head, eyes scanning the street as if imagining some distant road out of town. One night in August, Teresa overheard Victor threatening to kick Evan out. His voice was flat and cold. "You think you can live here and disrespect me? This isn't a hotel. One more word and you're gone." Evan didn't reply. But Teresa saw the flicker of something in his eyes, a mix of rage and fear. He walked away, slammed the back door, and disappeared into the night. She stayed up waiting for him. He returned hours later, soaked in rain, silent. That's when she knew something was going to break. On October 17, 1997, Teresa packed her overnight bag and left for a weekend conference 2 hours north. She left Victor in charge of the house. She kissed Evan goodbye, told him to be good, and reminded Victor, "Please, no lectures. Not this weekend." That was the last time she saw her son alive. She called home the next day. Victor answered, calm as ever. He went to meet a girl. Said he might stay over. Teresa was annoyed, but not alarmed. Teenagers need space, she thought. When she returned home Sunday night, Evan wasn't there. His bed was made. His football cleats were gone. And Victor? He was in the living room, flipping through the newspaper like nothing had happened. "You didn't hear from him?" she asked. "Nope," he replied, not looking up. "Probably with his friends." But something was wrong. The house felt too quiet, as if Evan had vanished and taken the noise of teenage life with him. No music blaring from the bedroom. No muddy socks on the stairs. No open chip bags left on the counter. Just silence. And something else. A smell. Subtle at first, like damp earth or spoiled meat. Victor said it was the pipes. Then he said it might be a dead animal under the house. "I'll check it," he promised. But he never did. Days passed. No word. No calls. No visits. Then came the letter. It arrived in a plain white envelope, typed, with no return address. The language was stilted, formal, full of praise for Victor, apologies for being difficult, and a declaration of ambition. Evan was going to Los Angeles to try out for football scouts. Teresa stared at the page for hours. It wasn't his voice. It wasn't how he wrote. Evan's texts, his notes, even his doodles. There was always personality, a bit of sarcasm, a warmth even when he was upset. This letter felt robotic. Foreign. She kept it anyway. Clung to the hope it offered. Maybe he really did run away. Maybe Victor had been right all along. But part of her never believed it. And now, after all these years, that part, the quiet suspicion that never went away, was turning into something else. A question with teeth. A memory with blood. Because Evan never left the house. He died there. He was buried beneath the floor. And someone had to put him there. By the time the fall leaves began collecting in their gutters, Teresa Spencer was gone for the weekend. It was a work trip, just 2 days away, something she'd done dozens of times before. She left Saturday morning after breakfast, kissed Evan on the head, and reminded Victor, firm but hopeful, "Please keep things calm." Victor gave a stiff nod. Evan didn't say much, just a muttered, "Yeah." No one knew it would be the last time she'd see her son alive. That afternoon, Victor claimed Evan had gone out to meet friends. Said he left around noon, wearing his football hoodie, a backpack slung over his shoulder. Said he might stay the night. Victor recalled to detectives years later, cool and precise. Teenagers do that. But that evening, when Teresa called to check in, Evan wasn't back. Victor repeated the same thing. "He's out. Probably with that girl again. You know how he is." And it was true. Evan had been seeing someone. Her name was Megan Doyle. A bright, sharp-witted classmate who lived 2 blocks over. Teresa liked her. Evan seemed lighter when he talked about her. If anyone could get through his hardened teen shell, it was Megan. Which is why Teresa was so relieved until the next night. When she walked through the front door Sunday evening, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Evan's room was untouched. His cleats were by the door, but his duffel bag was gone. Victor was in the living room, feet up, reading. "He hasn't called?" Teresa asked. Victor looked up slowly. Nope. Probably stayed over again. But there was no call from Megan. No text. No note. No voicemail. Just silence. Later that night, Megan came to the door, face pale, hands wringing her sleeves. "We were supposed to meet," she said, eyes darting past Teresa into the house. He never showed. I waited, for hours. That was when the knot formed in Teresa's chest and never left. She called a few of Evan's friends. Some said they hadn't seen him all weekend. One admitted Evan had seemed more distant lately, quiet, withdrawn. Another remembered him joking, maybe half serious, about running away from that house. It was enough to make a mother's heart twist. But the police? They weren't convinced. Evan had no known enemies. No signs of abduction. No broken locks or signs of struggle. His age, his recent behavior, it all pointed to a runaway. "These things happen," the officer said, not unkindly. "Teens come back." They filed the report. They did what protocol required. But Teresa knew her son. He wouldn't leave like this. He wouldn't vanish without saying goodbye. A few days later, the smell began. It crept in slowly. A sour, organic stench that hung low in the kitchen, near the floor. The kind of smell that made your stomach tense before your mind even registered it. Victor brushed it off. "Probably a dead animal under the house," he muttered, waving his hand. "Squirrel or raccoon got in." Then, in the middle of one night, Victor woke Teresa in a panic. "The snake's gone." "What?" "My python," he snapped, already in the hallway with a flashlight. The enclosure was open. Victor kept a pet Burmese python, about 6 feet long. He fed it frozen rats once a week, kept it in a glass tank in the basement. Teresa had never liked it, but she tolerated it. Now it was missing. And just like that, the smell had a new explanation. Victor tore through the house, lifting floor vents, checking behind appliances, tapping walls. The kids, Victor's biological children from a previous marriage, were frightened. Teresa was overwhelmed. The missing son was momentarily eclipsed by a missing reptile. That week was chaos. No sign of Evan. No sign of the snake. Just that smell. Stronger every day. Then came the letter. A plain white envelope. No return address. Typed on thick paper. Folded perfectly. Inside, a short note. "I'm okay. I'm going to LA to try out for football. Tell Mom not to worry. Jackson was right. I needed to grow up. I'll send for my stuff later." It was signed, Evan. The use of Jackson, Victor's middle name, was strange. Evan never called him that. In fact, he rarely referred to Victor by name at all. The tone was too formal. Too polished. It read like something someone older would write, someone trying to sound like a teenager. Still, Teresa clung to it. What choice did she have? The police accepted it as proof of voluntary disappearance. They updated his status in the system. And that was it. No investigation. No search warrant. Just waiting. But Teresa couldn't rest. She knew the letter was wrong. Every word of it scraped against her instincts. Evan didn't write like that. He didn't talk like that. And he certainly didn't apologize to Victor. Then there was the NFL comment. It said he'd be trying out for the National Football League. Evan was a great high school player. He had dreams of college ball. But never, not once, had he mentioned the NFL. It was too big. Too far away. A fantasy he didn't even entertain. The more she read the letter, the less it made sense. But without proof, she was powerless. Teresa did what she could. She contacted a dairy distributor and had Evan's photo printed on milk cartons. She passed out flyers at gas stations and bus terminals. She spent weekends in shelters asking questions, leaving posters on telephone poles. She followed rumors, called morgues, sent letters to out-of-state high schools. Weeks became months. Months became years. 4 years of searching. 4 years of nothing. Her relationship with Victor deteriorated. He accused her of obsession. She accused him of apathy. The house grew cold in ways that had nothing to do with the seasons. Eventually, they divorced. Victor stayed in the house. Teresa left with a suitcase and a ghost. She never stopped looking. Even when people told her to move on. Even when friends stopped returning calls. Even when the world tried to erase her son. She never stopped. Because something inside her refused to believe Evan had left by choice. And as it turned out, she was right. 14 years later, when a stranger crawled under a floor to check the heat, the truth came clawing back to the surface. Not with a bang, but with a whisper, a smell, and a pair of sneakers. 14 winters passed. 14 birthdays. 14 Christmases where one chair stayed empty, one gift never unwrapped. And still, Teresa Spencer kept looking. She moved out of that house on Blue Jay Lane not long after the divorce. She said she couldn't breathe in there anymore. Said the walls were too silent, too good at pretending nothing happened. She rented a small 2-bedroom apartment 2 towns over, started over at work, took up a second job on weekends. But every day when she got home and hung her coat, she'd glance at the bulletin board by the kitchen, where Evan's missing flyers still hung, corners curled, colors faded. She never took it down. Not once. The world moved on without him. His friends graduated, got married. Some moved away. Others didn't like to talk about Evan. It made people uncomfortable, as if bringing up his name gave weight to the void. But Teresa? She gave it everything. She joined online forums for missing teens. She subscribed to newsletters, wrote letters to talk shows. She mailed hundreds of flyers to schools, churches, shelters. She even traveled to Los Angeles twice, once in 2002, once in 2006, following up on vague tips that turned out to be nothing. She'd walk the streets for hours with nothing but a photo and a question. Have you seen this boy? Most people didn't even look. But she never gave up. Not when they said he was probably dead. Not when they told her to find closure. Because mothers don't bury hope. They carry it. Even when it's heavy. Especially when it's heavy. In 2010, nearly 13 years after Evan vanished, Teresa attended a vigil for long-term missing children in Portland. It was there, under the glow of 100 tea lights, that she met another mother. A woman whose daughter had disappeared from the next county over. The woman said something Teresa never forgot. The only thing worse than knowing they're gone is not knowing where. Teresa nodded. Because even after all this time, she hadn't stopped believing Evan was out there. And in a way he was. Not in Los Angeles. Not chasing football dreams. But right beneath the floorboards of the house where she had once made pancakes and folded laundry and said goodnight. She'd walked over his grave 1,000 times and never knew. When the news finally came, it wasn't dramatic. Just a phone call. A detective named Marquez. He sounded gentle. Careful. Miss Spencer, we believe we found your son. Teresa didn't speak for several seconds. She thought she'd prepared for this moment, rehearsed it even. But when it came, it felt like drowning. What do you mean, found? She asked. There's been a discovery. A home in Lakefield. It used to be your residence. Her knees buckled. She sat down on the kitchen floor and pressed the phone to her ear like it was the only thing holding her up. When she arrived at the station 2 days later, they showed her photographs. A faded football hoodie. A pair of blue sneakers. Dental charts. A plastic bag with the letter she once believed was Evan's. A letter she now understood had been the first lie in a long chain. She asked just one question. Where was he? They paused. And then the answer. Under the kitchen floor. She blinked. Which part? The crawl space. Beneath the corner vent. Teresa went still. She remembered that exact spot. She used to store cleaning supplies there. She remembered Evan crawling into it once when he was younger, pretending it was a fort. She'd stepped on that floor thousands of times. Made dinner above it. Vacuumed. Slept. All while her son lay buried just inches below. Later, alone in her car in the parking lot, she sobbed so hard she couldn't start the engine. Not because she was shocked, but because she had always known. Somewhere deep, beneath all the letters and the tips and the hopeful dreams, she had always known Evan never left that house. And now, the truth had surfaced. But peace? Peace was still far away. As the investigation reopened, detectives began retracing old steps. Reviewing old notes. Interviewing neighbors. Reanalyzing Victor Latham's timeline, his phone records, his ownership of the home. What they found was disturbing. Victor had never reported Evan missing. It had always been Teresa. Victor never called police. Never spoke to Evan's friends. Never joined any search. And when they asked him what he remembered about that weekend, his answers were vague. Slippery. I thought he left. He was always angry. I didn't think it was my place to go snooping. But it was one sentence that set off alarm bells. He said, if there was a body in that house, I would have smelled something. The detectives paused. That statement, unsolicited, and oddly specific, didn't make sense. Because Victor had lived in the house during the weeks after Evan disappeared. And every single person remembered that smell. The kids described it as sour and thick. Neighbors said it wafted from the windows. Even the HVAC technician who came in November of '97 noted a strange, earthy odor. But Victor? He insisted he smelled nothing. The man with the python, who had torn apart floorboards looking for a snake, who owned odor-neutralizing sprays for his reptile enclosure, he had missed the stench of a decaying body under his kitchen? Highly unlikely. More likely, he knew exactly what the smell was. Because he had put it there. And for Teresa, that was the final fracture. Victor wasn't just cold. He wasn't just dismissive. He wasn't just the man she once shared a bed with. He was the man who had stood above her son's grave and said nothing. For years. And now? Now he was the only person who could answer the question she feared most. But while the Spencer case was finally shedding its long, cold silence in Oregon, nearly 2,000 miles away, another story was quietly waking up from its own burial. It began not with a smell, but with a sale. The house on Logan Street in Baxterville, Kentucky had been empty for months. Abandoned after a foreclosure, stripped of its character by time and legal proceedings. The mortgage hadn't been paid in nearly a year, and when the final papers came through, the county cleared the home for auction. It was a simple listing, 3-bedroom, 1-bath, sold as is. A young real estate investor named Graham Nash purchased it without ever stepping foot inside. To him, it was just another flip job. Until the cleanup crew arrived. It was a sunny morning in May 2011. 2 workers from Grime 2 Shine Restorations began hauling out furniture, broken appliances, and old storage bins from the detached shed behind the property. The shed had been padlocked, but the lock was rusted through. With a light pull, it gave way. Inside, among cobwebs and water-damaged cardboard boxes, they saw something strange. A large blue plastic tarp, tightly rolled, duct-taped at every angle. It was wedged in the back corner, behind a toppled lawnmower and a bag of fertilizer. One of the workers bent down, grabbed the end of the tarp, and tried to shift it. It was heavier than it should have been. Not dirt. Not tools. Something dense. Settled. They peeled away a piece of tape. That's when the smell hit them. They dropped everything and ran. The police arrived within the hour. What they found inside the tarp was a woman's body, wrapped in thick plastic and linen, curled tightly in the fetal position. Her hair was matted to the side of her face. Her skin was leathery, preserved by the airtight wrapping and the cold of the Kentucky winter. She had been dead for at least 3 months. Fingerprint analysis confirmed her identity that same week, Mia Langston, 28 years old. She had been reported missing by her sister back in February, after she failed to show up for her niece's birthday party. There were no leads, no sightings, no bank activity. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Now, they knew exactly where she'd gone. And exactly whose property she had last been seen on. The owner of the house and Mia's former husband was a man named Dennis Rourke. Dennis was 49 years old. Tall, heavy-set. Known for his gray ponytail and a tendency to wear military surplus even though he'd never served. Neighbors described him as odd but harmless. Someone who mostly kept to himself and had a rotating list of young women moving in and out over the years. He worked in home renovation, built decks, fixed plumbing, collected antique radios. He also had a history of fraud charges, including forging contractor licenses, stealing equipment from job sites, and pocketing client deposits before vanishing. In fact, it was his financial trouble that had led to the foreclosure of the Logan Street house. And now, a corpse had turned up in the shed, wrapped in plastic. left behind like unpaid rent. Dennis was brought in for questioning the next morning. At first, he was calm, polite even, said he hadn't seen Mia in months, claimed she left him voluntarily. She had demons, he said. Sometimes people go looking for the edge. But when detectives asked why Mia's body was found on his property, his tone changed. I don't live there anymore, he said. That's not my problem. It was exactly the wrong answer. Because technically, at the time of Mia's disappearance, he still owned the home. And that changed everything. As the investigation widened, the police began to re-examine other names connected to Dennis Rourke. That's when another woman's story emerged. One from farther back. One almost forgotten. Her name was Kayla Moreno. She disappeared in 2005. Age just 22. She had been dating Dennis at the time, briefly, according to friends. She was bright, independent, worked 2 jobs, and had dreams of starting her own candle shop. But then she stopped answering her phone. Her apartment was found locked from the outside, her keys gone, her bank account untouched. No body. No crime scene. No suspect. Until now. When news of Mia's murder hit the local broadcast, Kayla's mother saw the report. She recognized Dennis immediately. He used to come by, she told police. Pretended to be charming. But something about him always felt wrong. She came forward with her daughter's story, and with it, a missing persons report from 6 years prior that had gone cold and dusty in the county archive. Detectives brought Dennis in again. This time, they pressed harder. He denied everything. For weeks. Until one August morning, after 48 hours without sleep, Dennis caved. He admitted to killing Kayla. He took them to a vacant lot behind an old strip mall on the outskirts of town, one he used to visit regularly back when he was doing handyman work in the area. There, behind a crumbling cinder block wall, covered in ivy, they found a rusted metal drum half buried in dirt. Inside they found Kayla. Just like Mia, wrapped in a tarp, duct-taped, sealed, and forgotten. Or at least, that's what Dennis had hoped. But dead women don't forget. They linger. They return. Sometimes in blue plastic. Sometimes in nightmares. And sometimes, in the exact places you thought they'd never be found. It wasn't the brutality of the act that shocked people most. It was the planning. The repetition. The calm with which Dennis described his actions, as if he were simply recounting how to seal a leak or replace a faucet. And like Victor Latham before him, he left a trail, not out of carelessness, but out of something colder. A belief he would never be caught. And for a time, both men were right. Until the walls shifted. The pipes moaned. And the buried dead began to rise. 2 men. 2 homes. 2 graves hidden in the most ordinary places. And one terrifying truth that connected them. They buried the evidence beneath their own lives. In Oregon, Victor Latham sat silent in a courtroom as the prosecutor laid out the facts. That he had forged a letter pretending to be his missing stepson. That he had told neighbors he smelled nothing, while the odor of death choked the house. That the murder weapon, a .38 caliber revolver, had sat untouched in his tool drawer for 14 years. It wasn't an impulsive act. It was a decision. A calculated, slow-breathing silence that lasted nearly a decade and a half. And in Kentucky, Dennis Rourke was walked in cuffs down the hallway of a county jail, the last light of freedom behind him. He had confessed to one murder and led police to another. 2 women, Mia Langston and Kayla Moreno, wrapped in tarps, buried in places he assumed no one would ever think to look. A backyard shed, a forgotten lot behind a strip mall. Their stories were horrifying. But what made them chilling was not the violence itself. It was the cold, quiet method. The hiding in plain sight. The pretending nothing happened. The false normalcy. In both cases, the homes became coffins with windows. Places where families ate dinner, argued about bills, did laundry, all while death lingered just below or behind them. In one, the crawl space was a tomb. In another, the tool shed was a vault. Both men lived over and beside their victims for months, years, without blinking. They didn't run. They didn't hide. Because they didn't think they had to. Victor continued living in the house where Evan lay buried beneath the kitchen floor. He cooked there. He watched TV. He dated other women. He vacuumed that floor, slept inches above it, and never once admitted a thing, not until forensic evidence made it impossible to deny. When asked during trial why he never came forward, he offered no answer. Not even a fabricated one. Just a shrug and a blank stare. It was the kind of apathy that scars everyone in the room. And Dennis? He didn't show much remorse either. His confession came not from guilt, but from pressure. From fatigue. From the knowledge that the tarp had finally been found, and with it, his illusion of control unraveling like cheap duct tape. He told police he just snapped. But the way he wrapped the body said otherwise. The way he positioned the tarp. The way he sealed the drum. This wasn't a snap. It was a system. Both men believed that if the body disappeared, the person disappeared too. They believed silence was safety. That if the walls held their secrets long enough, the world would forget. And for a while, they were right. Evan Spencer's face faded from milk cartons. Kayla Moreno's case file gathered dust. Mia Langston became a name whispered among friends but never answered by law enforcement. But the dead, they don't forget. And they don't stay quiet forever. In both trials, something remarkable happened. It wasn't just the evidence that moved the jury. It was the mothers. Teresa Spencer took the stand in Oregon. She spoke softly but firmly. She talked about Evan's laugh, his favorite cereal, the way he used to fake sick to stay home on Mondays. She told them about the day he disappeared. The lies. The smell. The moment she realized he had been beneath her feet the entire time. She looked Victor in the eye. He looked away. In Kentucky, Kayla's mother did the same. So did Mia's sister. They read texts, letters, poems Mia had written, photos of birthday cakes never eaten, rooms never redecorated. Life paused in grief. And through it all, Dennis remained still, emotionless, as if their pain was a language he'd never learned. Both men were convicted. Victor Latham was sentenced to life without parole for second-degree murder. Dennis Rourke received 2 consecutive life sentences, one for each body he buried. But this story isn't just about punishment. It's about what survives. Not the killers. Not the silence. But the persistence of truth. The refusal of loved ones to accept the lies. The way a mother keeps calling, printing flyers, returning to the same dead ends until the earth finally gives something back. It's about how a heating problem exposed a murder. And how a real estate auction unearthed another. The truth is, homes remember. Walls absorb. Floors creak under the weight of secrets. And sometimes the most haunting monsters aren't the ones that break into our homes. They're the ones that already live inside them. If you ever feel like something isn't right, a shift in routine, a silence too long, a smell you can't explain, don't ignore it. Because some truths don't go away. They wait. They rot. And eventually, they rise.